Hey there, welcome back to the next tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to talk about the click manager and how exactly to set it up. What the click manager does is it just sits on like a game manager. It just sits in the game and it looks for clicks, and what we're going to do today is we're going to track clicks, and any click that happens, if that object is an interactable, we're going to call its interactable script. And this is where inheritance plays a huge role. We're going to just go through kind of fairly quickly. We're just going to go through a couple things that are called that in inheritance that will make your life easier. And yeah, let's get into it. So the first thing we want to do is we're going to make a game manager. So we'll come over here, create an empty object, and we're just going to call it game manager. I have the game running, sorry. Redo that. And we're just going to name this game manager. I do this to all my games just because it's easier to keep track of. And the game manager, so what we're going to do is we're going to make a new script, and we'll put it in the interactable folder. Usually I move mine to managers folder because I have so many managers in my game, but for tutorial purposes it's going to go here, C script, and we'll call it click manager. Alright, so let's open this up. And like I said, this click manager, all it's going to do is look for clicks. If the object we're clicking, the game object, has an interactable class, we're going to call its interactable functions. And what this is going to do is allow us to put child classes on those game objects and redefine the functions that we're calling. So we never have to write multiple functions. We just have to call one function, and we just have to define it multiple times if we need to for those objects. And I'll show you what I mean in a minute. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to track our clicks, and we're going to make sure that we're going to see where our player is clicking at all times. So to do that, we're going to go into the update, and we're just going to check for an input down. Get mouse button down, 0 is left click, 1 is right click. So we're just going to do left clicks. And in here we're going to get our screen location. And in the newer versions of Unity, the camera.main.screen to world point is somehow just returning the camera position. So in order to get past that, put a variable called mouse I, which is the input. Set its Z variable to 10. And I'll explain this in a second. So we want to work in 2 dimensions, and by default this stuff returns a couple vector 3s. So we have to work around this. So in order to do that, we're going to define a vector 3. And this is going to be our camera.main.screen to world point, and we're going to put in our mouse I. So what's going on here is we're getting a vector 3. This function returns a vector 3, and if we didn't change the Z, it would be 0, and that grabs our camera because our camera always faces, it's on a different Z axis. Usually it's like -10 on a 2D game, and if we don't set this, we're not going to draw a line from the camera to our actual screen point in our world, if that makes any sense. What we're doing here is basically we're setting the camera, the depth of where to grab our screen point. If we don't set the depth, we're just going to get the camera's position. If we set the depth to 10, it's going to shoot a line from the camera to our screen point. And since our camera is -10 degrees away from the map, as you can see here, since it's -10 degrees away, it's going to shoot a line, and it's going to actually hit our layer that we're trying to hit, which is 0 at 0. Our game is at actual 0 axes. And if you can see here, just to make more sense a little bit, our camera's here, and if we don't set that depth to 10, it's not going to shoot a line from the camera to our game, which is on the 0 axis. So by setting that 10, we're basically shooting a line from the camera to the point where we clicked on the screen. And hopefully that makes sense. Moving on. I'm just moving on. If you have any questions, let me know. So that being said, let's go back. And we're going to turn this vector 3 into a vector 2 because we're dealing in 2 dimensions. So vector 2, and we'll just call this mousepause 2D, and that's going to be a new vector 2 called mousepause.x and mousepause.y. Alright, so now we have our actual clicking position. Now what we want to do is we want to cast a ray directly on the spot that we clicked and see if it hits any colliders. So this only works if your game has, if we're clicking something with a collider on it. We're going to call a raycast hit 2D. And that's going to be equal to physics2d.raycast Our origin will be the mouse position, 2D, and our direction will be a vector 2.0 because we want to get whatever is directly on the spot we're clicking. We don't want to necessarily cast a line anywhere. Basically, we're casting a like a dot, like the line is what's going to detect where we're clicking. So now we're just going to check if it's null. This means that we clicked something that has a collider on it. And what we're going to do now is whatever we clicked, we're going to scan its game object for an interactable class. So what we're going to do is we're going to get a component off of our hits transform, and it's going to be interactable. And what this does is this grabs any interactable component. So if we define a class that is called usable and its parent is an interactable class, it will grab that. And I'll show you what I mean when we tie this all in together in the next episode. Basically, just so you're not lost, let me just finish this code and I'll show you what this does. So now we're just going to check if we actually grab the component. And now, if we did find our interactable component, we're going to call it's clicked. And what this is going to do is it's going to look for the interactable component, and it's going to call its clicked function. And if this was a child, which we're going to look at in a minute, it will call its child's clicked function. So let's try that. Alright, so now what we want to do is we're going to go to our game manager and we're just going to add the component, and we want to add our click manager. Build the game, hit play. Yep. And every time I click something dense with a collider, it will call its function. Because I have this interactable script, that's why it's being called on my player. So now what we do is we clear, go to our project, we're gonna make an item real quick. So I'm just gonna steal these weapons from Games Plus James, drag these into here, and I'm just gonna slice them real quick so I have access to them. Slice, apply. Alright, so now what I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna drag one of these weapons in. Change its sorting layer because I can't see it. Reset that to 32. Do a point filter. Go back to 16. Alright, there we go. So now there's our axe. And right now if we go into the game, obviously nothing's going to happen. Number one, it doesn't have a collider. Number two, we don't have any interactable script on it anyway. So yeah, nothing should happen when we click this. So to fix that, what we're going to do is, first of all, we're going to put a collider on it. So there's our box collider 2D. Second, this is an interactable object, which means that we could either put the interactable script directly onto this, or we can make a child class. And this is what inheritance does. This is what we're going to need it for, because we're going to be making multiple weapons that do different things. So for example, if you click on the red axe and you want your character to do something special, that's what we're going to cover right now. So we'll rename this to red axe, and we're going to go into our project and we're going to create a new class called usable. And this script is going to be placed on any object that is able to be used or picked up by the player. And we're going to go into this script. And this is where it all kind of comes together. It's not derived from a mono behavior, it's going to be derived from our interactable class. So now what's going to happen is when we click on this item and we're getting the component right here, when this line is ran, it's going to look through this object, and anything that is from the class interactable is going to be returned. So when we call this, it's going to actually return our usable class because its parent class is interactable. So this is what I mean, watch. If you don't understand, watch. So we're going to call it what.clicked, so we're going to do a virtual override of clicked, and we're going to do debug.log you clicked a usable item. Now if we leave this just as it is right now, the only thing we see when we click this red X is this line of code and not this line of code. So watch what I mean. Ready? It's public override void, my bad. Alright, so now what we do is we go to the red axe and we're going to add component and we're going to call it usable. So this will make our item interactable now. Now we'll hit play. and we'll go over to it and we'll click it. And it says you clicked a usable item. Notice how it did not, it called our usable clicked function first, and it didn't call the parent function. If you want to call the parent function, you can do base dot clicked, and what this does is it will call its parent's clicked function. So we should see this first, you clicked usable item, and then it's going to call its parent's clicked function, which is this, interactable clicked. We'll save that, we'll go back in Unity just to test it out. Clear. And we'll click the red X, and that's exactly what happens. You click the usable item, interactable clicked. So that's what's cool about inheritance. So this line of code grabs any class whose parent is an interactable on our game object. So since this is the case, if anything is derived from interactable, like if we have any classes that are derived from the interactable class, it will grab that class essentially. So a rule of thumb is you don't want to put multiple interactable objects, interactable scripts on our game, on one game object, because it's going to you don't need to, number one, and number two, it's going to cause a couple errors. It's gonna just like, it's gonna get confused, because if you have multiple interactable classes, it's only gonna try to attempt to grab one with this line of code. You could change this line of code, but you don't need to. If you want to keep going further down the iteration process, this is what you do. So we go back to our game, go to our project, and this is a red X. So we're going to create a new script called red X. And we're going to open it. And instead of being derived from an interactable, it's going to be derived from a usable. Because it's a usable item. So now what we can do is public override void. So what we can do is, if you want the red X specifically to do something important or different from all the other usable objects, this is where we define it. And then it's your choice if you want to call the parent class. What I do by rule of thumb is I just define all the basics every usable item will ever need in here, and then I build off of that with my items. So we'll save this, go back into Unity, click our object, our red X, and instead of this usable script, this is, I'll give you an example. If we add two scripts of the parent interactable, it's not, you don't need to do it. It's just going to cause confusion. So we'll play, and let's see what happens when we click our red X. Right, so it didn't even call the red X functionality. You click the usable item, interactable clicked, and that's under our usable class. So it didn't even find the red X class on it. It didn't even call it. That's what I mean about not using more than one class that's derived from interactable. So what we'll do instead is we delete this, and now we only have the red X script on our red X, which is an interactable script. So whenever we try to find the component of interactable, since this red X is derived from interactable, it's gonna return this red X component. So we'll play. I hope this makes sense. Inheritance can get really confusing very fast if you're not organized, if you don't know what you're doing really. Now if we click the red X, do red X specific thing right there. So you can do this as far as you want. In future tutorials, we're going to look at making scriptable objects and passing in just serialized data to our objects, so we don't take up as much space in the compiler or in our memory. And yeah, this has been another tutorial. I hope you found it enjoyable. Hey, thanks for checking out my tutorial. If you're looking for more in-depth information, I have courses you won't find on YouTube. You'll learn what professional games like these use for physics to create amazing effects, stuff like gravity guns, hovering items, advanced 2D particle effects, screen warping, teleportation effects, warp speed blurs, and so much more. Go to 2dinunity.com, enter your email. I'll send you an in-depth tutorial that covers more than just the basics of an RPG. This includes multiplayer networking, lobby systems, chat input, essentially everything to go from an average looking indie game to a professional game industry standard. If not, you can still keep watching my free material on YouTube. Thanks for all your support, and I'll see you in the next video.